Yo, everyone. DrJaceAttorney here, bringing court back into session with a very special video this time around. I typically don't do videos like these, but that is the Mega Man X4 deep dive. If you guys want an example of another video that I did in a very similar fashion, check out my Ratchet & Clank Rift Apart video, which there should be a title card somewhere around here, but click that if you want to check that out too. But the main difference with this one is that I feel like this video is very personal to me, and it basically functions as a core memory from my childhood. It introduced me to a fandom that I never really grew out of, but nonetheless created some of the best memories I ever had as a kid. I'm not sure yet if I'll make more videos like this, as this is probably one of the longest videos I've ever put together, which, judging by the runtime, as you can see down below, yeah, it's a long one, so I don't know if I'll make another one of these. But if the reception is really good and you guys want to see more type of content done in this similar fashion, let me know down below and maybe you'll see more of it in the near future. So hey, if you enjoy the video, smash that thumbs up button down below. If you're new to the channel, consider subscribing and clicking the dumb bell so you stay up to date whenever we upload new content. But most importantly, let me know down below what was your favorite game or moment in the entire Mega Man franchise. I love talking to you guys about this series, so sound off down below. But I think I've wasted enough time here, so without further ado, this is why Mega Man X4 is a masterpiece. To me. Imagine this. The year is 1997. Sony's PlayStation has been dominating the market for close to 2 years in North America. At this point in time, so many games were ushering us into a new era of the third dimension. There was that one game with the orange rat that loved collecting bananas, another one about a dentist who explored museums, and who can forget the first game to introduce us to the world of Destiny Islands. It was no surprise at this point in the gaming landscape that if you were not going 3D, you were simply stuck in the past, or lacked the innovation to propel your game into a technologically advanced market that the world had never seen before. I'm certain it was a very interesting time for game devs who were working on IPs and franchises that were predominantly two-dimensional up until that point. Mario, Zelda, Donkey Kong, Sonic, all the surviving mascots from the early to mid-90s at this point were making huge strides to jump into the third dimension.
I'd shower you with coconut cream pie.
It was still an early time in gaming where a franchise would either make bank or go bust if their jump to 3D was not an instant hit. After all, Bubsy 3D was such a major success, right? But there was one franchise, one tried and true formula that a Japanese company was confident would survive this growing market, and it blasted its way into North America on August 1st of 1997. And that game was Now, I'm going to be honest with you guys right out the gate. This review is going to be highly biased in all the right ways. While it was not my first exposure to Mega Man proper, oh no, that honor belongs to another highly divided game on the PS1, which I think is the best Mega Man game in that sub-series. Mega Man X4 was my first exposure to the X franchise and made me an instant fan. Were it not for X4, I feel like my taste in the Mega Man franchise would have likely dwindled at that point. You remember that time we were always looking for that ultra badass series or character that just spoke to you as your teen angst was just on the horizon? Yeah, that was Mega Man X for me.
I mean, Mega Man's a good guy, right?
And it literally starts at the box art. Now look, I know people hate on Western box art because of how bland or boring it can be sometimes, especially when compared to its Japanese counterpart. But I want you to bear with me and see this from my view for a second. You're a young sprite DrJaceAttorney in his toddler youth. You're already a major Mega Man fan from the perfect 10 out of 10 Mega Man 8, which had 0 flaws to its name.
Shut up.
Christmas is around the corner and 'tis the season because you know you want to get your hands on the next big Mega Man game. Could it be Mega Man 9 this time? Or perhaps when you venture out to the store one day, you'll maybe find the previous 7 Mega Man games available to choose from to add to your ever-growing PS1 collection. At this point, you're very well aware that if you enjoyed Mega Man 8, there must be so many other Mega Man games to find.
A Mega Man.
However, as you venture into the store, you notice an interesting box art that catches your eye. It says Mega Man on the title, but what's this logo supposed to mean?
This is letter X.
Remember, it's the late 90s, so you're already a major fan of Dragon Ball Z, which was airing on Toonami at the time, and with your childish nature finding names ending with Z, X, or S, and other badass letters of the alphabet, your rational young mind comes to the conclusion that this game is made for men. Only badass men. But you also notice this is not the typical Mega Man you're used to. He's got more angular features to his armor, indicating the toughened battles ahead. A sharpened scowl on his face, showing, yeah, we're done pissing around with that kid shit called Mega Man 8. And that blood ruby of a gem embroidered into his forehead. A reminder of the blood-boiling fury that is hidden behind this face of justice. And Jesus Christ, who the hell is this badass behind him? He's got a freaking energy sword, and he's crimson red. Why does he have long blonde hair like a Super Saiyan 3? All these thoughts racing through your head as you finally come to the realization of, yeah, this one, mother dearest. Add it to my collection. Now then, is this a gross over-exaggeration of one of the less appealing box arts in Mega Man X history? Of course. But I can't deny the sheer wonder I had as a kid when spotting this for the first time, especially when my only prior exposure to Mega Man in terms of design was, well, this.
Ready.
Freeze! I'll crush you! I'll make a popsicle of you!
You can call me handsome guy.
But enough of this mindless babble. What about the game itself? Well, when you boot it up, I feel like there's an element that is often slept on when it comes to pure nostalgia for these type of games. And that begins with just the first company logo. That sound alone just oozes 90s charm, even as much as everyone's favorite PS1 boot-up logo. But finally, once we get past the main menu, we're given two very interesting choices to guide our playthrough, and that's at the character selection screen. With the game giving you the option to choose between either X or Zero, I like this little detail when deciding who to choose when you may be a newcomer to the series, like I was back when I first played this game. When the cursor goes over either character, there is a brief animation that plays, showcasing a small preview of what to expect from their gameplay style. With X, you can tell by the giant-ass booger that he shoots from his arm cannon that this guy is a long-range fighter. He's going to be your safety net for taking out enemies from afar without the need to get up close and personal with them. But what's this over here? Zero does not appear to have a projectile weapon at all. In fact, it looks like he's slashing with what appears to be a green lightsaber of sorts. And even his character portrait showcases this, with him grabbing the hilt of the blade from his back. Now, at the time when I played this game as a kid, I was obviously more familiar with a character like Mega Man, but Zero's design just oozed everything that was peak fiction at the time for me. Cool-ass hair, crazy armor, and a lightsaber. So yeah, we picked Zero as our first intro, and we know we made the right choice because even Zero gives us the thumbs up. Or is he flipping me off? I don't know. We even get introduced to the character through a cool anime cutscene. Now let's get this out of the way. The voice acting in this game is laughable at best to what the hell am I even watching at worst.
Who are you? My masterpiece. But who are you?
But voice acting aside, the visuals are still pretty interesting even to this day. I mean, what game that's rated E for everyone is going to have your main protagonist having night terrors where he is caked in blood? Yeah, I know the fandom likes to pretend this is oil because, you know, Reploids are robotic in nature, but nah, that's the Crimson Fruit Punch, baby. B-L-U-D, I know how I spelled it. But pause here real quick. Can I give a shout out to Studio Xebec, the studio that's responsible for animating these cutscenes? I did some research trying to dig around to see what this studio worked on throughout the years because for honestly a long time, I thought that they just did Mega Man back in the 90s and the company just went defunct. But no, these guys had such a huge catalog of anime that they worked on all the way up until 2019, right before they got absorbed into Sunrise Beyond. They produced shows like the OG Shaman King, the other two Mega Man animes like Mega Man Star Force and Mega Man NT Warrior. And they even did Zoid's Chaotic Century. Does anyone remember that show? Is it just me? Because I definitely stand Liger Zero. Maybe because his name has zero in it. But yes, who could forget their magnum opus Future Card Buddy Fight? Yeah, this is a real thing. But definitely got sidetracked there. I just wanted to bring up Studio Xebec because it's really cool to see that their early beginnings in animation was literally in the mid-90s with projects like Mega Man X4 and a select few other animes. But anyways, back to the game. After a brief dialogue box, we're finally dropped into the first stage of the game, Sky Lagoon. And right off the bat, the gameplay just hooks you in. The dashing to speed through the stages, both for platforming and dodging enemy attacks. Zero's 3-saber slash technique that is quick and super responsive. The wall kicking to ascend certain obstacles. This whole stage functions as a tutorial level for the player to become accustomed to this new character that we never got to play as before. No X3, you do not count. And while this is happening, you have a giant mechanoid in the background trying to impede your progress, creating a looming threat saying, yeah, you don't deal with me now, but you sure as hell are going to see me very soon again. We then close out the stage with our first encounter with Magma Dragoon. I like this little interaction here because it shows a past relationship between the two Maverick Hunters. This was something neat to me as a kid, as it created a sense of a believable world where these characters have tons of friends and allies alike that they may bump into on their journey. With the destruction of Sky Lagoon and the colony crashing down, we're now introduced to Act 2 of this stage. Now, I know I just got through saying that Act 1 of Sky Lagoon teaches you the ropes on wall kicking, but Act 2 is where you are really put to the test to make sure you grasp the fundamentals with it. Not only do you have scaling platforms that force you to come to grips with it, you even have this floor trap later in the stage that gives way, leading to a deep chasm. But what's this, Nani? An extra life and a full health regen? But the walls are closing in! I always love this part because at this moment of the game, the stage is confirming, have you mastered what it means to wall climb? Even in a life or death scenario? And just in case you had not come to grips with it yet, there's an extra life down here to ensure that this does not come off as a cheap death. Masterclass game design, in my opinion. From here, you get introduced to Iris, which again builds up the world and relationships in the mythos, as these characters have known each other for quite some time. Another positive that I can add to this. But immediately after, we have our very first boss encounter of the game. Just a little fun memory about this. I remember during one of my multiple playthroughs of this game as a kid, there was one time my parents were in the same room as me, and they saw the warning logo and sound flash on the screen. They genuinely thought that was a warning sign from the PS1 saying that something was wrong with the system and it needs to be fixed. And bless their hearts, they even asked me if everything was okay with it. Even on my first run as a kid, I knew that was part of the game and not a system error from the PS1, but it's always a funny memory I'll always have when revisiting this game. But either way, our first Maverick boss encounter is with the very same Maverick that was swiping away at us earlier in the stage. Time for some sweet revenge. The fight itself is really not that difficult on its own, but that's okay with it being an intro boss. He's really big, really slow, has a very predictable attack pattern, and overall he's just a very easy boss to test everything you've learned so far throughout the game. Plus, it makes you feel like a chiseled badass that knows what he's doing when playing as Zero, everyone's favorite Maverick Hunter. But when you land that final hit and that animated explosion triggers, it really does make you feel like you just took down a gargantuan mechanical force of nature. A quick convo with Colonel, who's another familiar character to Zero, and the mission is complete. If it sounds like I'm breezing through the story element of the game, it's cause I am. I really want to focus on the gameplay features that made Mega Man X4 an instant classic versus the silly story and character dialogue that is still memed on to this day. But not to worry, I'll still cover the story and my thoughts on it towards the end of the video, especially that scene.
No, this isn't happening!
But from here, we have 8 stages to choose from, along with 8 Maverick bosses to exterminate. The game, in a way, kind of defaults you to choosing Web Spider stage, since once you have control of the cursor, it's already on that stage first to select it. Now, as a kid, I had no idea about this, but my logic in choosing Web Spider's stage first way back then was that the stage select art showed a rainbow, and rainbows are happy, meaning this stage will be easy to get my feet wet. So we venture off into the jungle to uncover the secret weapon being guarded by none other than... The music and atmosphere in this stage right off rip is so pristine. You got the lush foliage permeating the whole stage, the crisp water flowing throughout, that rainbow in the background to let you know to stay happy, cause this stage will be a breeze. Enemy placement is challenging, yet fair, the sprite work is on point, and the stage is just overall a blast to play through. This is honestly my favorite level throughout the entirety of X4, and I'll even say it's probably the best stage through the PS1 trilogy, that being X4, X5, and X6. It's really that good. Getting through the stage is a blast, but it's when you get to the boss room where my mind was blown as a kid. This brief dialogue between Web Spider and Zero was just so revolutionary to me, because I need you to remember what was the standard before this, specifically with Mega Man 8. In that game, there was never really a lore or mythos surrounding the 8 robot masters you encountered throughout the stages. Unless, of course, you read the manual, which I did have as a kid, but let's not count that for now. You more or less got their dumb little intro in the beginning,
I'm Frostman.
and then a cheesy one-liner right before fighting them.
Say Say hello to my cute bombs.
And that's it. These fights were still cool, but the world of classic Mega Man kind of fell flat for me when encountering these bosses. But in comparison to the bosses in X4, these are actually living characters within the world, and only become adversarial because of the current circumstances they were forced into. Well, for some of them anyways.
Are you ready for your final journey?
This dialogue shows that Zero and Web Spider have known each other for years, with Zero being shocked that he's even working for Repliforce. And given the current strain between Repliforce and the Maverick Hunters at this time, they're forced to do battle. I know it's something minor, but this was an element that always pulled me into the X series of Mega Man games more than the classic series could ever really do. And now we get a huge wake-up call when it comes to boss encounters. If you remember what I said earlier about the intro stage boss, he was basically piss easy as a lumbering, slow robot that had easily readable attack patterns. But starting with Web Spider, you come to a quick realization that these Mavericks are just as agile as either X or Zero and have attack patterns that require you to pay close attention if you want to avoid getting hit. The cherry on top of these encounters too is that just when you think you have it all figured out with the boss, just as their HP gets low enough, they spice things up and trigger new attacks to try and gain an edge on you. It really does feel like an anime fight come to life as Zero is clashing with this boss, and as the boss is getting hit over and over again, they try a last-ditch effort to try and finish you off. But with the defeat of Web Spider, we also get introduced to a staple of the Mega Man series, ability unlocks from defeated bosses. Now, in typical Mega Man form, you would usually get the name of the new attack and maybe a brief preview as to what it can do. But with Zero's entire kit being centered around his saber, he actually unlocks techniques as opposed to the standard weapon abilities that X would get. Even the techniques are named in a Japanese fashion, giving a sense that these are of a different nature than what the player may be used to if they had played any of the prior entries in the X series, or hell, even the classic ones at that. As a kid, these were always frustrating to pull off because I had no idea what these acronyms even meant. What the hell is an SM? Is that the circle button? The R1 button? The triangle button? What's so hard about saying the actual button I have to press so I can pull off these sick anime moves? Now here is where things get a little tricky with the boss game for X4, in that should you know the weapon weaknesses of the Mavericks you intend to annihilate, the actual fight with said boss will be trivialized as seen with the following. This, of course, has been an ongoing problem in the X series as early as the first game, beginning with what we like to call Spark Mandrill Syndrome, in that the boss is practically immobilized and the actual fight itself becomes somewhat of a joke. But here's my defense as it relates to X4, specifically with Zero. Because Zero unlocks new techniques instead of a brand new weapon ability like X, sometimes the new moves Zero obtains are just that. Techniques and abilities that Zero can now use to diversify his fighting prowess. As a result, some techniques learned aren't even elemental weaknesses to certain bosses. Take for example the technique learned when defeating Split Mushroom, known as, which allows Zero to spin in a circular pattern while airborne to slice enemies and obstacles that dare come within range from any direction. It's a much sought after improvement in Zero's kit as the series would continue well into the Mega Man Zero franchise. This is a technique that you'll be using against enemies and bosses alike throughout the entire stage. But let's get back to the levels again. I last recall Zero being on the hunt for a hidden laboratory, as Dexter would say it, and awaiting within the confines of that lab was none other than... So the opening to this stage is actually quite interesting, in that I believe it was Capcom's attempt to somewhat appease the gaming crowd that was trying to get their fix on 3D gameplay in a Mega Man game. Don't worry, you don't exist yet. And they kind of achieve that with this cool effect of this spiraling staircase as you ascend the level. Super trippy the longer you look at it, but definitely something I enjoyed when revisiting this game. It's a shame that this spiraling staircase effect is the only instance where Capcom really tries to incorporate some level of 3D into Mega Man X4, but either way, I'm just glad it's here to begin with. From there, the level doesn't have too many standout moments outside of the mini-boss before Act 2, and these drills that you have to time your jumps with perfectly to avoid getting hit. But then we get to Split Mushroom himself, who, as I mentioned before, becomes somewhat of a joke once you know that his weakness is Zero's Raijin Geki. You still have to land it properly, as Zero can only activate the technique while on the ground and only directly in front of him. And this is what I was getting at earlier with Zero's abilities versus X's in this run. In that a lot of the time, if you want to land a boss's weakness, positioning is the key when it comes to Zero landing the hit. Otherwise, you're gonna have to fight the boss like normal. So Split Mushroom, a pretty fun boss that keeps you on your toes throughout. And thank God that he's gone, because but what a palate cleanser Split Mushroom was on my pizza, because we're shifting gears and going on the hunt for the traitor to the Maverick Hunters, or the irregular hunters?
Yeah, I guess so, yeah.
Who hid himself inside a volcano, and his name is I really like this stage as it has a high skill ceiling where if you can time your jumps just right, you can dash jump through all of the falling lava rocks like it's no one's business. But I low-key suck at this game, so I gotta tackle each jump one at a time. It's still super fun though. But we also encounter a new type of enemy from this stage. And what's this? A Reploid in what looks to be a suited armor? I wonder if we can pilot it ourselves at some point, And lo and behold, not long after spotting the enemy piloting the ride armor, we soon get to disembark with ride armor ourselves. And this segment was just so fun to play as it diversifies the gameplay in a unique way. While the player is technically invincible while piloting this hunk of metal, the ride armor itself is not. So now it becomes a game of how far can you get into the stage without losing the ride armor. The level even splits up at one point, letting the player choose to either forego the ride armor in pursuit of a different route in the level, or keep the ride armor, assuming it has even survived up to this point, and rewarding the player by letting you use it in combat against the boss of that level. You can even defeat Magma Dragoon with the ride armor still active if you were careful enough throughout the level and in the fight itself. The Magma Dragoon fight itself is one of the best in the game. First off, his design is just so sick. I mean, look at him. But on top of that, his kit resembles familiar techniques from another Capcom franchise, Street Fighter. As you'll see Magma Dragoon pulling off Shoryukens and Hadokens like he's facing off against M. Bison. With or without the ride armor, this fight is probably one of the best ones in the entire game. And upon defeating Dragoon, you're rewarded with a bit of extra story to add to the ongoing conflict between Repliforce and the Maverick Hunters. Magma Dragoon hints that he would have given him power had he worked for Repliforce. Just who is he? This entity will forever remain a mystery to never be spoken of again. Clearly. Obviously.
Sometimes foreshadowing is relatively obvious.
But this is something I wished more of the X4 boss fights did, giving some bit of backstory of why the Mavericks did what they did and chose to serve under Sigma or Repliforce. I know we get different types of dialogues between some of the Mavericks and Zero or X, but I don't know, Frost Walrus calling Zero a punk kid just doesn't do it for me, honestly. It was at least something they picked up on as the X and Zero games carried on with future titles, so at least there's that. Anyways, now that Zero has claimed the... It's time we melted the next Maverick on our Reploid hit list. Starting things off in the level, we get a neat little Easter egg showcasing the frozen remains of Blizzard Buffalo, the Maverick we defeated back in Mega Man X3. And further into the stage, when we face off against the mini-boss, we also see the frozen remains of Chill Penguin from Mega Man X1. Nothing too crazy, but it's always neat to see these little details to showcase the connectivity between the titles and give some fan service to the dedicated players. I'll be honest though, this completely flew over my head as a kid, as I never played Mega Man X3 before playing Mega Man X4, so I always thought this was just some generic looking Reploid. The more you know. The rest of the level is themed as you would expect it from an ice stage. Slippery slopes, falling icicles, and gimmicky mavericks you know would not survive being in any other stage. Oh, and of course there's the Ice Claw mini-boss that I mentioned earlier that gets made a joke of if you came in with the Ryu engine. I actually like the second half of this stage more than the first half, as you have these flying ice peacocks? Is that what they are? What kind of bird is this? The point is, they introduce a neat gimmick to the stage where as soon as they appear, there is an invisible timer where if you don't defeat them before that timer goes off, the surrounding area gets turned to ice and you take a bit of damage. The enemies, of course, get frozen within that said area, but also the ice becomes slippery on the platforms you're gonna land on. It definitely keeps you on your toes and makes you a bit more aware of enemy position throughout the rest of this stage. We finally get to our first chunky boy of Mega Man X4, and the dialogue exchange between Frost Walrus and Zero honestly affected my understanding of Zero and X for years to come, for better or worse. The first thing Walrus exclaims is, "What is that blonde kid up to?" That phrase alone made me believe that both X and Zero were simply teenagers. Kids down the block that were close to my age. And these grumpy old mavericks were just boomers that wanted to change the world for their old evil schemes. I don't know, looking back on it now, it's super dumb, but I just thought that was funny. The boss fight itself is pretty simple, especially if you brought in the corresponding weakness, but Frost Walrus puts up a decent enough challenge even with the correct weakness. A fun maverick I always enjoy coming back to. But of course, everyone knows that once you obtain the ice weakness, or it's time to tackle the stage that, quite honestly, I think gets an over-exaggerated bad rep in the Mega Man X community, and that's the stage of Now look, I understand that ride chase levels are not everyone's cup of tea. Would I have preferred a traditional stage compared to the other 7 Maverick stages? Of course. But I don't mind just one stage being dedicated to a little bit of variety through the Ride Chaser sequence, especially since practically every Mega Man X game has it in some variation aside from X1, X3, and X6. The stage starts off fine enough where you have to avoid bottomless pits and shoot at enemies along your way to the exit of this cavern. But when you get to the outside, that's when the stage gets a bit more interesting. At certain segments of the level, Jet Stingray will actually try to impede your progress and attempt attacks on you. But if you're quick enough and position yourself just right, you can rev up the Ride Chaser and slam into him, causing him to retreat until a bit further into the stage where you can repeat the process again and again. While doing this doesn't affect the boss encounter at the end of the level, slamming the Ride Chaser into Jet Stingray and seeing him retreat multiple times in a fiery explosion always brought a wave of satisfaction to me that no other stage could really give. Yeah, that's right, you bastard. Get the hell out of here. Now, I wish the same could be said for the boss fight itself, as Jet Stingray leaves a lot to be desired. Like, really, what the hell is he doing here? Are these tadpoles? Mini Stingrays? Something else that I dare not mention? Not only that, but his boss fight is super damn it. Not only that, but his boss fight is super damn it. I was saying that the boss fight itself is super God damn it. I'm trying to say his boss fight is... You gotta be kidding me.
Misery, misery, misery. That's what you've chosen.
Okay, positioning is key in this fight if you really want to use the ice weakness against Jet Stingray, which technically goes back to what I was praising the split mushroom boss fight for earlier in the video. But once you get that down, the fight actually is a cakewalk. Once Jet Stingray goes off in a fiery explosion, I welcome you to what quite honestly is my favorite stage and boss encounter in the entire game, and that's the stage of Now listen, there's certain ironclad rules when it comes to video games that automatically get you a pass in the badass or fun department. Having your level take place on a moving train going at a high octane speed? Check. Having a bomb-ass soundtrack to accompany said train sequence? Check. Have the level cap off with the boss sprinting on foot while matching the speed of the train only to then jump onto the stage making a roaring entrance? Check.
Perfection.
As a matter of fact, some of the best levels in gaming have taken place on trains. Uncharted 2, Slide 2, that one stage in Splinter Cell Pandora Tomorrow, and Slash B stage is no exception. You even get the return of the ride armor in this stage where you can even destroy portions of the train carts to acquire hidden items. And who doesn't love that? And I don't care what anyone has to say, the ferocity and design of Slash Beast just makes him such a fun maverick to face off against in every playthrough of this game. And he quite honestly is the reason why I even sometimes choose to replay Mega Man X4. The stage and the boss himself are just so memorable. Now we get a close runner-up on the fun factor to Slash B stage, because this one also has a pretty fun bit with the Maverick known as... Wait, what did you say? Why are you saying it like that? Now, this stage always screamed 90s anime to me. Coupled with the music playing in the background, you have an awesome backdrop of airships going to battle hundreds of feet above a neon-lit city, while you yourself are hopping across and destroying your own fair share of mini airships to cut down the enemy numbers. It's a chaotic frenzy because the airships are even willing to destroy their own allies in an effort to take you down. And I love how this bleeds into the gameplay because it incentivizes you to make a mad dash across these platforms and even rewards you with a heart tank for being quick enough. The ride armor in this stage is pretty neat too. Not my personal favorite compared to the Slash armor, and maybe because that reminds me of Zero, but fun to use nonetheless. Second half of the level pits you against these laser enemies that require timing and position to properly take down. And then the mini boss of the stage is just so satisfying to destroy with the Ryu engine. We get to Storm Owl himself at the end of the stage, and remember how I mentioned the interaction between Zero and Frost Walrus warped my understanding of Zero and X being rebel teenagers with angst? Well, same thing kinda happens with Storm Owl, except more so with this bit in his intro. That slam on the ground really put me through it as a kid, mainly because enemies like Storm Owl and Split Mushroom, being the smallest of the Mavericks, did not seem that intimidating in comparison to the other Mavericks we've already faced, almost giving them a kind of weak vibe. But when I witnessed that slam as a kid and the entire damn screen shook, it made me understand that these Mavericks are killing machines, that despite whatever their size is, they could snap a normal human like a twig. Like, yeah, if a normal human's head was underneath Storm Owl's foot when he made that slam, that dude is dead. Just something small I always enjoyed from this interaction between either X or Zero with Storm Owl. The boss fight itself is fun as you dodge and weave your way through his attacks, and this is actually the only boss fight in Zero's campaign that utilizes a boss weakness that has a weapon gauge. It's nothing too crazy, it's just an AoE attack that you use like 4 or 5 times before the gauge depletes, and then you have to practically fight Storm Owl as normal, but I figured I'd mention it because it's the only instance where I can mention it. And finally, we jack into cyberspace as a Battle Network predecessor to face off against... Okay, can someone explain this to me? Is cyberspace an actual physical realm you can dive into in the Mega Man X mythos? Is it just the Reploid psyche that's being transferred into cyberspace to explore? Can humans transfer into cyberspace too? It's really not important in the grand scheme of things, but the sheer concept of this stage always perplexed me growing up, as we never really saw something like this again until Mega Man X7, and the less said about that game, the better.
Burn to the ground! Burn to the ground! Burn to the ground! Burn
But this stage itself also adds a unique gimmick in that you're racing against the clock to get the best time in each section of the stage in order to get the best rewards, with S being the best rank and, well, I don't know what the lowest rank you can get on these is because I don't suck at these stages. The stage does become significantly easier if you obtain the Kuenbu from earlier, since now the yellow electric balls can be disintegrated with said technique as you're dashing throughout the stage. The second half of the stage requires you to switch the verticality of the room in order to get some balls to run over enemies or open up new passageways. What's this stage's obsession with balls? Eventually you make it to Cyber Peacock, and his fight is great as well, requiring you to sneak in a saber swing before needing to dodge out of the way right when he attacks you again. Another great boss fight for the books. But this fight also gets a major pass in my eyes because of the goober face he has upon defeating him. But with the 8 Maverick bosses sliced down the middle like a Subway sandwich, we make our way to the final stages of the game. Repliforce begins making a move over at the spaceport, so it's up to Zero to race against time in order to stop them. I feel like the music that accompanies this stage really does add to the feeling that this is a race against the clock, as tensions are at an all-time high, with Zero needing to stop the Reploids that supposedly started the conflict before they do something drastic. Good enemy placement and level design makes this one of the more enjoyable final stages to blast through on, which is both a blessing and a curse, which I'll get into later. But overall, an excellent appetizer for the game's final levels. And the level even caps off with an enjoyable confrontation with Colonel, Zero's rival/adversary that's been building up throughout the course of X4's campaign. The best part about this fight is that there's no discernible weakness to Colonel that you can cheese or BS your way through, at least just casually playing this game. So you really do have to memorize his attack patterns and find the appropriate openings to squeeze in some damage if you want to put him down for good. An excellent boss encounter that accompanies an excellent stage for these late game levels. This is kind of where the finale of X4 starts to whimper a wee bit. With the final weapon now acting as our true final stage, it definitely leaves a lot to be desired. The first half of the level is just a narrow corridor with a handful of enemies that you've already encountered throughout the course of the game. And before you know it, you're already at the boss door to complete this portion of the stage. Speaking of bosses, our first encounter of the final weapon is Iris? Yeah, this whole bit is quite conflicting for story purposes, but we'll touch on that in a bit, as I've purposely been dodging details of the story in order to focus on gameplay so that the story portion can be elaborated on later in the video. But yeah, this boss fight isn't too bad, it's just rather simple. All you need to do is keep slashing at Iris's purple diamond thingy as she spawns little jacks in the air and occasionally does an Omega Beam as a wombo combo. This fight maybe would have been a bit better if your saber slashes didn't knock back Iris to stun her briefly, because then this is what majority of the boss fight looks like. It's not a bad boss fight, but not one of my favorites. The second half of Final Weapon is only a little bit better than the previous bit, as it has 2 separate narrow corridors that you can take with minimal enemy variety, unlike the only one you got from the previous portion of the stage. What I can say is good about the Final Weapon stage is the music, which again slaps hard as a final stage where our heroes are fighting against all odds to stop the evil Mavericks. Next boss on the chopping block is General, and his towering figure leads one to believe this is going to be quite the Reploid to take down, who likely has insane sprite animations that dominate this gigantic room where he resides on his throne, which shatters as he stands. Like, Jesus Christ, man, what kind of conqueror hockey does he have? But in reality, he's not really any of those things. He just kind of floats around the room a bit, occasionally throwing his fists out, which then require you to platform onto them in order to land a hit. Also, does anyone know why he takes this much damage from a saber swing at this this range? Something I discovered by complete accident while playing this game again. All in all, a pretty weak boss in the grand scheme of things, especially when we already had Frost Walrus, who was also of a domineering scale and took complete control of the room to showcase his force and power. General is kinda just, yup, it's time to float over here. Never mind, time to go back over. Prepare to be fisted. Although, I'll give him props. He's the only Reploid so far that survived their own internal explosion after getting their ass handed to them by Zero so far. Sorry, Magma Dragoon, but...
I thought you were made of sterner stuff.
And finally, the true final stage of Final Weapon, which has us in tradition of entering the boss rush room right before the final boss of the game. How many times can I say final in this sentence? If you're a Mega Man fan, you know how this works. Refight the 8 Mavericks or bosses you fought up until this point, utilizing any weapon weaknesses you've acquired throughout the game. We all know that the primary purpose of this part of any Mega Man game is to artificially extend the already pretty short game time. These never really bothered me growing up as a kid, but when you're trying to get the game over with and advancing to the final boss, you really start to see the padding in these sequences, especially when noticing how long these boss explosions can be. Now watch that happen 8 times. But once all is said and done, we finally have our final face-off against the big bad of the series that no one saw coming whatsoever, Sigma. I actually really like Sigma's final boss fight in this game, given that it has 3 unique phases that add differing forms of challenge. His first phase is this Grim Reaper looking form that is fairly easy to take care of with the Ryu engine, but he has some pretty fun patterns to dodge and avoid. His second phase, on the other hand, is where he sheds his cloak like a Yakuza endgame villain and starts hurling his scythe all across the room as he tries to corner you with his laser beam eyes at the same time. And then the true final form of Sigma caps us off in the third phase, where Sigma showcases his true final form. Quick note here, I definitely like the artistic design that they used here to represent the fall of Sigma and his role throughout the game. You first meet him as a shadowy figure hiding his face and identity, which matches exactly what he was doing throughout the course of the game in manipulating Repliforce into becoming enemies of the Maverick Hunters. More on that later. But then in his second phase, he emerges from those shadows and reveals himself in the form of a facade, if you will, an illusion to what he once was. But once the final phase starts, you truly see the state of Sigma and how far he has fallen. A soulless husk of his former self whose only resemblance is a peeling face mask on a mechanoid body. Truly nasty stuff. But this fight is fun too, as you have to juggle fighting 2 different bodies of Sigma that offer different attack patterns. One utilizing a laser gun, and another using wind-style jutsu for an easy insta-kill. The 3 heads appearing throughout each segment offering a different elemental attack that you have to avoid or utilize as platforms to assist with incoming damage. But once that final explosion occurs, you get your final cutscene with Sigma, the General, and then Zero himself. And there you have it. You just beat Mega Man X4. Well, the Zero campaign at least. We still have a whole other campaign to get through in just a minute, but before we do, we've been putting it off long enough, but it's time to discuss this game's, story. Listen, if you guys have been following me long enough, you know I love the Mega Man series, specifically the X, Zero, and Battle Network franchises, as those were the sub-series I got the most out of as a kid. But when it comes to story, the only game I think that can be praised along with its gameplay is the Mega Man Zero franchise. The X series, while definitely a step up in storytelling from its former classic counterpart, is still a bit of a joke in the grand scheme of things, despite Capcom really wanting me to feel for these characters and emotional beats. What doesn't help this fact, and what should come as no surprise to anyone who is a fan of this game, is that Mega Man X4 had a god-awful localization in its dubbing of the animated cutscenes that propel the story forward. I'm sorry, but if I'm hearing Shakespearean trash like this...
What do you think you're doing? Stop the coup now! Never. If that's your decision...
We're waiting.
I'm sorry, I'm just gonna end up laughing in a scene that is supposed to be taken seriously. Long story short, if I'm replaying Mega Man X4 or any of the X series of games for that matter, it's primarily for the gameplay and not its story. But enough of the dodging. Let's dissect this bad boy of a story from top to bottom and see what works, what doesn't, and what's just...
Don't ask such a silly question. I'm breaking contact now.
Wait, Zero! I'm serious.
Let's start with Zero's story first, shall we? Since that is the first campaign we just got through talking on. We open up with Zero being awakened by a strange, ominous figure shrouded in mystery, an entity the likes of which we have never seen before. It's Wily. It's Wily. Plain and simple. This should not come up as a mystery to anyone, but it is a mystery to Zero himself, as he does not recall who Wily is. As the dream goes on, Wily lectures Zero on being his greatest masterpiece and ordering Zero to venture out and destroy him. At which point, Zero begins to receive massive migraines as images of his past flash before his eyes. I remember streaming this game in the fall of last year, which I'll have a title card here somewhere so that you could check that out. And people told me that they headcanon this red liquid that's in Zero's hands to be oil, because you know, he ripped apart Reploids who are mechanical by nature, but I'm sorry, that color is crimson red. Zero obliterated these guys like the psychopath he is. That is 111% blood. B-L-U-D. What rating was this game again? Zero awakens from his dream none the wiser as there is a call for all Maverick Hunters to... where he is notified that Replifor seems to be using Mavericks to occupy Sky Lagoon. Zero departs, and so begins our first mission. Similar to what I mentioned earlier, you get a brief cutscene with Magma Dragoon at Sky Lagoon's core, where you basically conclude that the station will come crashing down, causing massive casualties. A trend I'm sure we will never see again in the Mega Man franchise. Zero makes his way down to Ground Zero, and notices the destruction left by the Mavericks doing, swearing that they will pay for this. It's here where we are first introduced to Iris, Zero's friend? Love interest? Either way, they seem to know each other quite well, which is where we are also introduced to the Colonel of Repliforce, Colonel, who is also Iris's brother. This is where the plot of X4 starts to get really dumb. Because of Colonel's presence at the Sky Lagoon's destruction site, Zero suspects Colonel along with Repliforce and requests that they return to HQ with Zero for questioning. But Colonel refuses to disarm out of pride. And that's literally what causes the domino effect for a majority of the game's story. I don't know, maybe Zero was a little too aggressive with the accusations against Colonel and Repliforce? Maybe try not throwing that Maverick slur around, Zero? Cause it's clearly seen as an offensive term in the X universe, as seen in Command Mission.
Red Ips! You Maverick!
Yeah, Red Ips went into full attack mode upon X dropping that word, so Maverick is a slur in their universe. But getting back to the plot, because of Zero's baseless accusations, Repliforce thus begins a movement to claim independence from the human government and create a nation for Reploids only. For they are the most powerful army in history! Same cutscene where we also see a shadowy figure that seems to be pulling the strings as to this coup initiated by Repliforce and the subsequent battle with the Maverick Hunters. I'm sure none of us have any idea who this is. It clearly must be a new villain introduced into the X mythos. But you know, this is just the tip of the iceberg, because this story indulges itself in completely avoidable situations that could easily resolve the conflict at hand if the characters just, I don't know, talk? Is that such a foreign concept in the year 20XX? Like, look, take this for example. Once you defeat the initial 4 Maverick bosses, you get a message from Colonel requesting that Zero meet him at Memorial Hall, to which you're like, okay, cool. Maybe he actually wants to talk now about what's going on and how Repliforce is being framed. To which Iris tells Zero not to fight him, and Zero responds with, "It's a matter of personal pride." What?
What?
This is a non-aggressive invitation. Why is everyone jumping to the conclusion that a battle will happen and that it's unavoidable? What makes it even worse is that we are treated to a cutscene where Colonel is just waltzing around Memorial Hall like, I hope Zero doesn't ambush me for literally no reason after my very polite non-aggressive invitation. And I'm sorry, I'm going to let this scene play for you guys real quick.
Colonel! What? I'm disappointed in you, Colonel. What do you think you're doing? It's not too late. Stop the coup now. Never. If that's your decision, prepare yourself!
Stop, please! Brother, please! Don't you remember? Zero saved my life.
Oh. Very well then. I'll spare your life for now. But next time, there'll be no mercy.
Zero, please, don't fight with my brother. If you do, I'm afraid that one of you may end up...
Someone must stop Repliforce.
Zero!
Okay, there's a lot to unpack here. Colonel literally says,
What do you think you're doing?
in a form of shock, implying that he was very surprised that Zero would even attack him here, and that he actually just wanted to meet up and discuss things over with Zero. Also, the way Zero says coup here irks the hell out of me.
Stop the coup now.
Zero, the P is silent. Try again.
Stop the coup now.
Coup.
Stop the coup now.
Coup.
Stop the coup now.
Never mind. And then in response to stopping the coup, Colonel simply responds with,
Never.
like, I'm sorry, is that all you have to say? No explanation, no discussion before Zero says,
Prepare yourself.
I'm sorry, but that bit always sends me. I don't care how bad it is. Either way, Iris stops the two from fighting and postpones the inevitability of their two blades clashing again, which actually does happen again after defeating the remaining Maverick bosses. This time, though, we're treated to an actual boss fight between Zero and Colonel, and like I mentioned earlier in the video, it's an enjoyable boss encounter. Although I do find this brief dialogue between Zero and Colonel hilarious. What do you mean you don't want to fight, Zero?
Prepare yourself.
Also, the utter riz Zero gives here when saying that Iris will be sad if she loses Colonel, as if he knows with 100% certainty that he's about to obliterate Colonel's ass. Wait, what?
Wait.
Anyways, upon returning to the Hunter HQ, we notice a missing Iris on the right side of the screen. She's no longer here. I'm sure she's currently seeking therapy or counseling for the trauma Zero just inflicted on her by the massacre of her brother. And nope, she's actually the next boss. Okay, I kinda get what they're going for here. Iris having lost her brother despite the constant pleas to Zero that she made for the two of them not to fight, only for Zero to fully antagonize Colonel on multiple occasions until they ultimately had their bout to the death, is now succumbing to the grief of having lost a sibling and giving into that grief as a form of power so that she can seek revenge on her brother's killer. But that's not what we get here. I don't even know what this purple crap is that she has in her hands. What the hell is that, Iris? And you know what's hilarious about all of this? For literal years, I thought this was just some random form of dark energy that Iris just picked up off the ground and became evil at the end. I mean, look at this. It's pulsing purple flames. What's not evil about that? But what it actually is, and take this for what you will as I read this off of the Mega Man fandom wiki, don't judge, is Colonel's core that Iris was able to salvage from his remains, which allowed her to then merge her programming with Colonel's to then fuse into the ultimate Reploid she and Colonel were originally planned to be. Now, this is storytelling that I can actually get behind, but the main problem is, it's not in the game. I've played X4 on multiple occasions from beginning to end, and never once was this story beat explained or even hinted at. I had to look on a wiki to find this information, and that's what is the most annoying part about all of this. There are actual nuggets of good storytelling in here. all it would really take is maybe an extra dialogue box or two to properly flesh things out for the story that Mega Man X4 was really trying to break the mold in telling, especially when prior iterations of the series' main character looked like this. But we all know what follows this fight. Upon Zero defeating Iris, we're treated to a glorious cutscene that has cemented Mega Man X4 in infamy for its story, for better or worse. And because I love you guys so much, here's the entire clip of Zero's infamous cutscene.
Iris!
Zero,
Hang in there, Iris.
please, stay away from Reploforce. Let's live together in a world where only Reploids exist.
Iris, there's no world just for Reploid. It's only a fantasy.
Yes, I know, but I wanted to believe it. I wanted to live in a world where only Reploids exist with you.
Iris! 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 Ah! No, this isn't happening! There's no reason for me to go on. What? What am I fighting for?
Now, it may just be my lack of understanding the Japanese language, but I feel like the original Japanese voiceover work for this scene does a good job conveying emotional pain rather than, you know, real pain. But did you know that Lucas Gilbertson, who played Zero in Mega Man X Command Mission, X8, and Maverick Hunter X, did a redub of this scene in its entirety? Take a listen.
Iris! Iris.
Zero.
Iris, hang in there.
Please, stay away from Reploforce. Let's live together in a world where only Reploids exist.
Iris, it's only fantasy. There is no world just for Reploids.
I know, but I wanted to believe it. I wanted to live in a world where only Reploids exist. With you.
Iris. 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 Iris! Iris. Iris. No! This isn't happening! There's no reason for me to go on! What am I fighting for?
Now, I don't know about you guys, but Gilbertson's portrayal of the Crimson Maverick Hunter in games like Command Mission always felt right to me, and definitely was how I envisioned the character speaking whenever I boot up old Mega Man X or even the Zero games. But dialing it back to X4, our next encounter is with General, and this exchange was definitely odd. Zero confronts General to let him know that many lives were lost thanks to the actions of Repliforce, which I'm assuming he's referring to both Reploid and human lives, to which General responds by saying, "There's always a price to pay for independence." But General, I could have sworn you literally said in this scene that this claim for independence was not about insurrection or rebellion against their human creators. But now there's no such thing as too high of a price to pay for Repliforce's independence? Whatever. This ham-fisted way of forcing General to be a heartless bastard and ultimately clash with Zero is best summed up in his own words.
My fate is sealed. I have no choice.
But finally, we arrive at the fateful confrontation between Zero and Sigma. With the defeat of the Mavericks and Repliforce, the mastermind behind the whole scheme decides to reveal himself as his own final trump card. He even starts to taunt Zero and telling him that it was no scheme to stop Repliforce or the Mavericks, but it was actually Zero himself that wanted to destroy Iris and Colonel. After all, Zero was, at his core, a bloodthirsty maniac, which we all get to see in a stunning animated flashback sequence with Sigma as the previous leader of the Maverick Hunters. And I gotta say, if there was a set budget for animating the X4 cutscenes, majority of it was definitely put into this. I feel like this is the only cutscene in the game that tells a complete story with a beginning, middle, and end, rather than cutscenes prior that focus more or less as interludes in between certain sequences. I mean, look, you literally have Sigma getting briefly informed on the rogue Maverick that is going on a Reploid killing spree. You have the first encounter between Sigma and said Maverick. You notice the gap in confidence and precision Sigma has compared to Zero, but then, Nani? What's this? Sigma realizes he may be bit off more than he can chew with this psychopath. The battle then increases in intensity as Sigma draws his own energy blade to even the odds, while Zero unsheaths his his lead pipe. I'm sorry, this energy blade should be cutting right through this, but whatever. Eventually, the fight takes a turn for the worse as Sigma loses an arm, putting Sigma at a major one-sided disadvantage. And Jesus Christ, Zero, he really goes in on Sigma here. But Zero's head soon starts flashing W for Wumbo, and Sigma takes this as an opening to put down the crazy Maverick for good. Sigma is last seen stumbling out of the lab, requesting that the Red Maverick be taken back to HQ for further studying. You see what I mean? This cutscene alone tells a story in and of itself, and I'll commend X4 for this. They did a pretty bang-up job here. Once we transition back to the game, I find it super hilarious that despite Sigma having just told this flashback to Zero, Sigma is shocked by the fact that Zero was a Maverick. At least that's what the question mark implies. To which I ask, Sigma, weren't you the one narrating this flashback? How are you shocked by your own plot twist? Anyways, 3 boss fights later and Zero defeats Sigma. Although I have to admit, there's a hint of villainy in here where in Sigma's third form, he taunts Zero by telling him that Iris is waiting for him in death. Just something I found kind of raw that he would say to Zero after experiencing that trauma not too long ago. But in a twist no one saw coming, Sigma reveals upon his defeat that the final weapon is on a collision course with Earth, and there's nothing Zero can do to stop it. We then get a brief cutscene with General admitting that Sigma had blinded him and Repliforce to the truth and decides to sacrifice himself to stop the collision between Final Weapon and Earth. As Zero escapes in a shuttle, he ponders his inability to protect the people he cared for the most, like Iris and his friend Colonel, and questions whether or not Reploids were destined to become Mavericks after all, as he returns to Earth. And so concludes Zero's campaign in Mega Man X4. Now look, I know we just got done ripping Zero's story campaign a new one, but I'll give Capcom credit where credit is due. This was a form of storytelling that they really were not used to at the time, especially with the Mega Man series in general. So the fact that there was even an attempt to add some semblance of story into the game, I will give them credit for. It's a shame we can only dream of what could have been in better circumstances. And so concludes the Mega Man X4 review. All in all, it was a great game and a masterpiece in and of itself, and in all honesty, I really enjoy... Oh, wait, what? We're not forgetting anyone. Who are we forgetting? Oh yeah, Mega Man X himself. After all, the game is not called Zero X4.
You gotta be kidding me. That's so close.
If you've made it this far in the video and were wondering why I have not even mentioned X in any of the gameplay segments or the story beats, there's a very good reason for it.
Would you guys hurry up? It's been a whole hour.
Whenever I'm replaying Mega Man X4, I'm really playing it for Zero's campaign. That's not to say X's campaign is not good. In fact, this is probably the best we've ever seen Mega Man X in a game so far. But Zero's gameplay is just a notch up above what X is, and I really like it for that reason. Now, of course, I don't just skip the X playthrough when I revisit Mega Man X4. It's just my second playthrough whenever I revisit the game. And like I mentioned earlier, X's campaign is more or less the normal run of the game, whereas Zero's campaign is, well, I wouldn't say hard per se, but it's definitely one octave above X's, as you have to get up close and personal with enemies to utilize your saber swings, versus X being able to shoot at enemies from a safe distance. However, there is one element to X's playthrough that makes it stand out from Zero's in a positive way, and incentivizes you to do multiple runs with it. It's something that has been a staple of X even from his first entry of the series, and that's the item game. Now, as a kid, I never really strategized which were the best stages to visit first and in what order so that I could minimize backtracking, since like I mentioned earlier, I loved majority of the stages from beginning to end, so revisits weren't really an issue to pick up the collectibles I missed out on with my initial run of the stage. But now as an adult, it's definitely interesting and more fun trying to find the least backtracking method while collecting all of the armor parts, the heart tanks, sub-tanks, weapon tanks, and this useless thing. This is what I have so far as my least backtracking item run in X4 with X's playthrough, with the only stage revisit being in Magma Dragoon's level, where you need to charge /beast weapon ability to get the armor piece of this level. I'm sure I'm not the first one to have a run like this, and for all I know, there's even better runs out there than the one I have listed, but let me know what your favorite item run is for X4 down in the comments below for both X or Zero. And while technically you can collect heart pieces and sub-tanks with Zero for his item run, X's item run is just a step above Zero's in that X brings a unique element to his playthrough. It should come as no surprise to anyone that we have to talk about one of the most important items for a character like X, and that's the armor pieces. This was definitely one of my favorite elements in any X game when it came to item collection, as the armor pieces for X always came in a new variety with each subsequent game, along with new abilities to test out. So here's what we have for the armor pieces in X4. The leg parts let you hover for a brief period of time and also lets you dash in midair. The chest armor halves damage by 50% and allows you to perform the invincible Nova Strike. The arm pieces actually have two variations. One is the stock charge shot, which allows X to charge up to 4 charge shots at once and fire them as he sees fit, while the other, and my personal favorite, the plasma charge shot, which fires up to 3 plasma balls wherever the shot lands and causes continuous damage. And finally, what is likely the most busted variation of this armor, the headpiece, which allows X to fire endless uncharged special weapons. I know the headpiece has always been a point of contention in the X series, since I feel like Capcom could never really find a definitive ability that they want the headpiece to function as. Sometimes it was to break open situational blocks that would be above X, others would be to find hidden items, but this? Jesus, they said screw it and gave us a power fantasy so broken that the same headpiece armor was nerfed in the following X game to now be just a 50% weapon energy reduction versus the infinite spam we have in X4. And honestly, getting the 4 armor pieces one by one and seeing X slowly morph into the ultra powerful Reploid by the end of the game is so satisfying, since the actual abilities with each piece are extremely useful and the armor is super slick in design as well. But yeah, that's the gameplay rundown for X. The only remaining bit we haven't touched on is the story that accompanies his own campaign. The story beats more or less follow the same pattern as Zero's, with the key differences really being the intro and ending of X's campaign. X's intro showcases showcases a secret meeting between Sigma and General, where Sigma offers a plan to destroy the humans before they decide to turn their eyes on General and Reploids specifically. General refuses the proposition and shoos Sigma away before Sigma warns him that he will change his tune very soon. Not long after, the Sky Lagoon incident occurs, Repliforce is branded as a den of mavericks, and it's up to X to put a stop to them, along with his new faithful companion, Double. I'm sure his name simply means he's double the size of your average Reploid, and nothing hinting whatsoever that he may or may not be a double agent that will slay his allies in an instant in a sea of blood to appease its true master. I'm sure that will not happen. The rest of the Maverick stage run plays out more or less the same as Zero's, with the one exception that X gets an extra boss fight with Colonel once 4 of the 8 Mavericks are destroyed versus the anime cutscene that Zero gets.
Someone must stop Repliforce.
But once the 8 Mavericks are defeated, Colonel gets a hole blasted in his chest, and we progress to the final weapon stage, we get introduced to another massacre of a cutscene, with Double going Giga Chad mode and obliterating the Maverick Hunters at HQ effortlessly. However, there's something with this cutscene that's cemented in my disdain for X's and even Mega Man's portrayal in the 90s, in that, why was he voiced like this?
No further transmissions unless necessary to carry out the operation. What if I become one of the Mavericks?
Don't ask such a silly question. I'm breaking contact now.
Now look, I know I just got through going over how bad the English dubbing was for the anime cutscenes in X4, but good golly, this was not how I envisioned X sounding like even as a kid. Like, I can maybe look past it with the way classic Mega Man is portrayed, since he's somewhat boyish in nature based on his design, but Mega Man X, the leader of the Maverick Hunters, sounding like this?
Zero, if I become a Maverick, you have to take care of me.
Don't be ridiculous.
All respect to Ruth Shirashi, who did the dubbing for classic Mega Man and X, as well as Clown Man. I actually didn't know that until I started listening to the voice again.
Weakling, this isn't a joking matter. Ouch! Ouch! What have you done to me?
But this was definitely a product of its time and just a major miscasting in general. 8-year-old me was envisioning X sounding like the grizzled teenager as portrayed in X5 versus whatever they were going for in Mega Man 8 and X4. Anyways, going back to Double, we have our boss encounter with him in place of the Iris boss fight from Zero's campaign. And I gotta say, I think this fight is significantly better than Iris's. Not only does Double dominate the entire room with his presence, but his weapon weakness, which is ironically the double cyclone, actually makes the fight itself a bit more difficult the more you use it, as it spawns attack drones from Double's body every time you land a hit with it. I'm honestly surprised that no other X game ever used a boss's weapon weakness like this as a means to up the challenge of the fight to balance things out, at least to my knowledge. Let me know down in the comments if there's even another Mega Man game period that does something similar. Upon the defeat of Double, we face off against General, whose boss fight functions practically the same as Zero's, and then we finally face off against Sigma, who reveals that he plans to use the final weapon created by Repliforce to destroy humanity. X thwarts Sigma's evil plans, General sacrifices himself to stop the final weapon, bada bing bada boom, X saves the day and flies off in a space shuttle. This is also the one and only animated cutscene that features X himself physically present in it, outside of the title intro, of course. And in all honesty, guys, there's a reason why I gave such a huge chunk of time to explain Zero's story versus X's, and that's simply because you can really tell that Keiji Inafune, who was one of the game's producers, just wanted this game to be about Zero. It's no secret in the Mega Man community that Zero was actually intended to be the main playable character of the X series, but fearing a negative reaction from fans, Inafune reduced Zero to a role secondary to X himself. But you can tell as the X series went on, hell, even the inception of the Zero sub-series on the GBA, Inafune was slowly creeping towards his wish of making Zero the main driving force of the X games. And that is on full display when playing X4. Zero's campaign has more anime cutscenes than X. More of the cutscenes feature Zero in them when compared to X's. And honestly, while I literally just got done ripping the nonsensical story in Zero's campaign just a few minutes ago, the character relationships just felt more natural in his campaign. Zero's HQ companion being Iris just felt more natural. The rivalry between Zero and Colonel felt more believable. And the confrontation between Zero and Sigma felt way more personal. But I'll give X this over Zero when it comes to their respective endings, in that I feel X's story definitely leaves off on a more somber note, with X pondering if all Reploids are doomed to eventually go Maverick and requesting Zero to take care of him should that happen to X himself, with a loomy version of X's stage clear theme playing in the background. It just gives off a vibe that these two notable Maverick hunters will one day come to blows to put the other one out of their misery from being a Maverick. A fate that this series has been looming over ever since the first X game and will likely conclude in the subsequent entry. I said likely. And there you have it. There's Mega Man X4 in a nutshell. I know there was a lot to cover here, but I wanted to make sure I went over everything with a fine-tooth comb to really get across why this game means so much to me. Regardless of all the gripes that I have with this game, which to be honest is mainly limited to the story itself, it does so much right in many areas of the gameplay to where I truly believe the X series could never overcome again. Don't get me wrong, even though I have a soft spot for X5 and I'm more of a recent appreciator of X8, the less said about the other two, the better, I think X4 is really where the X series of games peaked in terms of gameplay, and that's a damn shame. But I'll always remember the sheer wonder I had when exploring the wilderness of the jungle stage, the sheer tensity of facing off against a formidable foe like Slash Beast, and the undeniable fandom that I latched onto because of this game as a whole. There's a reason why I can come back to X4 multiple times and it feels like I'm playing it new again for the very first time, despite this being like my 50th playthrough. I know a lot of people will default to X1 being the best in the series, and to be honest, I totally get it. Everyone's going to have their personal favorite X game and what they think the series should strive to be like, but X4 for me just ticked off all the right boxes. New innovative gameplay that propels the series moving forward, a story that, despite its glaring flaws, was truly ambitious and commendable given what came beforehand, and some of the most beautiful sprite work I've ever seen in a video game to date, which I really believe went underappreciated back in the day given the climate of the gaming industry during the time this game released in. Even with all that said, I still want to see a potential Mega Man X9 in the future. Capcom has been hitting it out of the park with all of their recent IPs getting ample time in the sun to shine. Resident Evil, Monster Hunter, Street Fighter, and even Mega Man himself through his recent game collections, having all revitalized their respective fandoms and telling Capcom, yes, we want more of this quality. Here's to hoping that the X series gets another stab, because I truly believe modern day Capcom can make something special that can be a worthy successor to the highs that X4 reached. And Mega Man 11's existence is a true testament to that. But if we never get another entry, that's okay too. I still have this game to fall back on, and I'll continue to for years to come. Because after all, that's why Mega Man X4 is and always will be a masterpiece. To me.